great to have you here tonight. Welcome everybody again. The special teaching for September, Whose Land? And of course it's a controversial subject today, but we should not hide from controversy if it's challenging the truth. And we above all are people who claim to know the truth. So part of the purpose behind this is to empower God's people, that's you and me, not to be afraid to speak up. But in speaking up, we have to do it intelligently. And this is education. That's what we're doing during these nights. Now let's just do a little recap on that first slide, that first PowerPoint, Ross, thanks, from last week. All right, so there goes the land of Israel. That line there, that border is 1/10 the size of the land area of New Zealand. Those black, bold borders cover not only Israel, but also what is called I prefer to use the term as others do, the disputed territories. Occupied is wrong. When we went down to Parliament to protest after 2334, one of the guys from News Talk ZB was on the phone to me, interviewing me live in Auckland. Well, you guys who went on that were loading up on the bus, and he's asking me, I'm saying, but the land of Israel, they have a right to be there on that land. And he said, but it's occupied. He said, but the Israelis are occupying it because they're building upon it. I said, well, then the Palestinians are occupying it too then. I said, it's disputed. I won that argument in front of all those people on the radio. I thought I won the argument. But that's the borders of Israel. And they should have at least that land, okay? And you remember that, there goes the West Bank. Just to remind you of the strategic location of all of Abraham's altars. Those altars meant something. That is where God covenanted with Abraham. To your descendants I give all this land as an everlasting covenant. Number 1 is at Shechem, modern-day Nablus. Number 2 is the hills east of Bethel. Number 3 is down in Hebron, Kiryat Arba. And number 4, of course, is Mount Moriah, Jerusalem. God covenanted with them in all those places. And you can see how the devil contends for those spots. He's lost. He's a loser. But boy, he puts up he's like a spoilt brat not getting his own way. And what you see there is the devil kicking around like a little baby, squealing. Because that's the sign, the modern state of Israel is a sign that the Messiah is coming, that Jesus is on his way. And remember, that is what they call the pre-1967 lines of Israel, the blue, that's the little state of Israel. That is actually not 1/10, that's just 1/13 for the land area of New Zealand, the or the 1967 lines they call it. But if Israel had all her Bible land, the land the Bible says the Jewish people will get, it goes from there to that. So that's quite a whack. And of course, that's going to cause a little bit of headline news in the media on BBC particularly, who will be very displeased when they see that happen. I think somehow Jesus will be back then to back it all up. All right? And I thought just to mention again, last week I asked you the question, does God involve himself in politics? And I think we came to the solution, yes, he does. And I'm asking that question because, you're in a meeting house of people, and you often come and help us, where we shout out and make a noise about Israel, even if it's crossing our government, as we did at the end of 2016 with UN Resolution 2334. But does God involve himself in politics? Yes, he does. The Bible's full of it. And one I didn't mention last week, remember the king of Assyria, Sennacherib? He surrounded Jerusalem in Hezekiah's day. Made all sorts of boasts to Hezekiah. Says, don't think that you people can rely on the God that Hezekiah has told you to trust in. I'm the king of Assyria. All the gods have bowed to me. And he didn't know who he was speaking to. It wasn't only Hezekiah listening, God was listening. And God went out and struck down 185,000 top Assyrian troops in one night. The angel of the Lord went down and cut them down. And the next morning, woke up, there's his army dead, and he's beaten. He has to go back to Assyria. So yes, that's God involving himself in politics. We need to see a bit more of that stuff, don't you think? I think Donald Trump would agree with me. But, so does God involve himself? Yes, he does. Should we as Christians get involved? I believe, yes, we should, and that's why we are. That's why we are. And look at this. From Romans chapter 13, the Nazis used this in the 1930s to try and twist the arms of Christians to back Hitler and his policies. Romans 13:1, everyone must submit himself to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. That would lead us to believe that everything out there, including Kim Jong-un and all the others, are established by God. Consequently, he who rebels against the authority is rebelling against what God has instituted, and those who do so will bring judgment on themselves. But this Bible clarifies itself. As it goes on to say, for rulers hold no terror for those who do right, but for those who do wrong. And there it is there. This, going back to the authorities that exist have been established by God, is talking about authorities that hold no terror for those who do right, but for those who do wrong. Do you want to be free from the fear of one in authority? Then do what is right, and he will commend you. Now, this certainly does not talk about the Nazis, does it? They were actually, they were bringing terror to those who were doing right, and they were commending those who were doing wrong. So that Nazism was not, Nazi Germany was not an authority established by God. I'm just showing you that there are times when we can speak up and cross our government and say, this is wrong. For example, abortion. Other issues. Okay? You remember in the 1980s, the huge 500,000 signature petition against legalizing homosexuality in the nation. We had to say something. We can't do nothing. So there are times when we speak up, and this is particularly our call as a church in regards to Israel. For it is God, for he, that's the government, is God's servant to do you good. Well, if it's trying to do evil, then it's not established by God. That's my point. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword for nothing. He is God's servant, an agent of wrath to bring punishment on the wrongdoer. I'm old-fashioned. I believe that there should be proper crime and punishment, proper justice, because it becomes a deterrent to naughty, mischief human nature. And if human nature is not harnessed, brought into control, it goes wild, and that's what we see happening in our world today. And again, we see the same principle in 1 Peter 2, submit yourselves for the Lord's sake to every authority instituted among men, whether to the king as the supreme authority or to governors, who are sent by him to punish those who do wrong and to commend those who do right. There goes the principle there. We are to submit to these governing authorities around us, the New Zealand government, as long as they are commending those who do right and not punishing those who do right. As long as they're punishing those who do wrong and not punishing those who do right. Okay. For it is God's will that by doing good you should silence the ignorant talk of foolish men. I'm just trying to establish the fact there is a place for Christians to speak up, and that's why we do so as loud as we can, particularly regarding Israel, because we are the bearers of the truth. We know the truth. You know the maps I just show you? We know the truth that it is historically and biblically the land of Israel, the land of the Jewish people. As you heard last week, there has never been any such state called Palestine, let alone Palestine with Jerusalem as its capital. The Palestinian Arabs have taken the name Palestinians as if to suggest that they have had a sovereign state in the past and the Israelis have stolen it from them. And that is not true. All right. And finally, how then can Christians get involved? Well, Jeremiah 31:10, hear the word of the Lord, O nations, and proclaim it in distant coastlands. So our job is to make sure people hear. And sometimes for people to hear, we have to shout loud, do as much as we can so they can hear what we have to say. But particularly in regards to these days, it's hear the word of the Lord, O nations or Gentiles, proclaim it. So what we're doing tonight is proclamation, declaring the word of the Lord. So, we put a bit of money into these 5 advertisements for these meetings over September, deliberately with a big Israeli flag, and whose land? What are we doing? We are saying, hear the word of the Lord, O nations, and we are proclaiming it in distant coastlands, right here in New Zealand, which is the most distant coastland from Israel. And finally, of course, this one's from Isaiah 62. For Zion's sake, I will not keep silent. This is our response. I will not keep silent. For Jerusalem's sake, I will not remain quiet. So when our government comes out in 2016 and says that Israel is building on illegal, according to international law, the Israeli settlements on the West Bank are a flagrant, I forget the technical terms, a flagrant violation of international law, then what international law are they talking about? This actually was set in international law. And so when you take Israel's case as a case of justice, you don't even have to bring the Bible into the argument. Just on the basis of justice of what the nations told the Jewish people that they could have after World War I is a case to contend for. And you'll note that the promises to the Arabs were all kept. They actually got Syria and Lebanon and Iraq as national, sovereign, independent Arab states, not to mention the Hashemite kingdom of Jordan, which we'll talk about next week. So we start to get to the real heart of the story next week. Joshua's time? Yes. At that time, they actually took all the land. They did take all the land that Moses had seen in those days. Yeah, without a doubt. Moses was looking from Mount Nebo. But it certainly didn't cover right up to the Euphrates at that time. But certainly Moses couldn't see the Euphrates. He was a long way away. But they went and took all that land that Moses had seen. And it included all the land that you saw within that black border that I presented at the start of tonight. But it also included, of course, those lands on the east of the Jordan River, where you had the 3 tribes of Reuben, Gad, and half tribe of Manasseh, on what is called part of the Hashemite kingdom of Jordan today, which in Bible times was called Gilead. Okay, so they did. When will Israel go from the river of Egypt in the south right up to the Euphrates? Who knows? I mean, we'd just be happy if Israel was proclaimed international sanction, have sovereignty over just what we've seen within those black borders tonight. All right? But they will get it. You watch. Jesus will come back and make sure they get what is rightfully theirs. Any other questions? No more. Okay, let me just wrap things up a little bit. Maybe, we heard tonight, in fact, put that other PowerPoint on briefly there, Ross. That guy there, Theodore Herzl, he's known as the founding father of Zionism. And it was his work that actually brought... He formalized Zionism and made it political Zionism, and he formulated the Zionist organization, which today is called the World Zionist Organization. And it was his work that led 20 years later to the Balfour Declaration. Okay? Now when you look at the earliest Zionist movement, Zionism being that movement where the Zionism to me is that movement where the Jews are reaching out to obtain and lay hold of their biblical land, homeland, as a national state once again. And that's what I call Zionism. So we are Christian. I believe that I guess I'm speaking for you, that we're Christian Zionists, and that we believe in the right of the Jewish people to have their sovereignty within their biblical borders of Israel. Okay, that's what Christian Zionists are all about. The Jews going back to their land is just the beginning of the restoration of the people of Israel. Their ultimate restoration, Dan, is when the whole nation of Israel turns back to the God of Israel and believes in him as they once did. And that is a part of the future restoration of Israel that we see in the Bible. But this is the guy who started the political process. Now, it's very interesting, the divine inspiration that he had as in the political aspirations, Zionism, etc. He said that when he was 12 years of age, prior to his bar mitzvah, he had an impressionable dream. And in that dream, he said the King Messiah came. He took him in his arms and swept off with him on the wings of the wind. And he says, on one of the iridescent clouds, we encountered the figure of Moses. And he said, in the dream, the Messiah called to Moses. He said, it is for this child, Herzl, that I have prayed. But to Herzl in the dream, he said, go declare to the Jews that I shall come soon and shall fulfill all my good promises for your people and for the entire world. So that was rooted in Herzl from the beginning as a 12-year-old boy. Another guy, Eleazar ben Yehuda, at the same time was not known to Herzl, but he was another Jew who was the father of the Hebrew language. And he saw the need and the vision for the Jewish people worldwide to unite together in one language. So guess which language he revived? Their ancient spoken Hebrew language, with much of its roots in the Bible. And he also received divine inspiration. And he said that when he was formulating the idea of perhaps reviving the Hebrew language, he said, and I quote, in those days it was as if the heavens suddenly opened and a clear incandescent light flashed before my eyes, and a mighty voice sounded in my inner ears. And this is what it said: the renaissance or revival of Israel on its ancient soil. And so you see the inspiration of God coming to these people. I mean, Herzl in some ways was at one stage claimed to be an atheist, but he must have had some belief in God, because he recorded these occurrences when he received the sort of divine inspiration. I'm bringing this to you to show you that God is at work in believers and unbelievers. To see, you know, the Bible says in Zechariah, he says, I am very jealous for Zion. I am burning with jealousy for her. What that means is that God is wanting to re-establish the Jewish people, the people of Zion, back in their land, the land of Zion, the land of Israel. And as I've said before, it's all because of this verse, Psalm 102, verse 16, for the Lord will rebuild Zion and appear in his glory. What's it all about? It's about the coming of the Messiah, the coming of our Messiah. And he says, I'm going to rebuild Zion so that my people will be there when I come back to appear before them. You've got to see that in the whole picture. And then you appreciate what we do. You appreciate that it's not just about the Jews living on their land. It's about the full restoration of Israel, not just to their land, but to their God, the God of Israel. All right. I think that's all I had to show you there, was it? Maybe. That's just some of that's the first, maybe the second Zionist Congress in Basel, Switzerland. We're going back 120 years. And that's in 1948 on the 14th of May, when David Ben-Gurion, the guy standing, is proclaiming Israel's Declaration of Independence. And you can see the legacy of Theodore Herzl hanging above him in that photograph. That's, you go down in Israel, nearly every city, I guess, has got a Herzl Street. Okay, that's the influence that, of course, he had on the creation of the modern state of Israel. There goes, this is the Balfour Declaration, that's Lord Balfour. I had a little bit of a talk with an Anglican minister who came to see me about maybe 6 years ago. And a very nice guy. And we got on, there was a rapport between us. We sat and drank coffee in the church lounge out there. And on his way out, I gave him my book, Holocaust Exposed. And he had my book, you can have that, Holocaust Exposed. I said, we're pro-Israel in this church. He said to me, well, we're of the other side, we're pro-Palestinian. And then he said something funny to me. He said, what gave the British the right to tell the people of Israel, or the Jewish people, that they could have that land anyway? And I said, well, okay, I guess, okay, John. Now you know his name. I said, okay, John, then when you think about it, what gives any people or nation the right to tell another nation this is their land? I said, and this is an ex-retired Anglican minister, I said, what gives any nation the right to tell another nation that is or cannot be their land? I said, who has that right, John? Ended the conversation. We know that right is God's. And God saw it necessary to record that right here. He hasn't done it for any other nation, but for the Jewish people, he says, this is their land. And it's a warning for us, watch out. So we're backing the favourite in the fight. Okay? We've decided in this church to back the favourite. That's God.